Liberalism is realism in international relations. Liberalism and realism present fundamentally different perspectives on international relations, particularly regarding human nature, the nature of states, the role of international organizations and laws, economic interdependence, the influence of domestic politics, and the causes of conflict and war. Here are the key points of contrast. Perspective Perspectives on human nature, liberalism and realism. International political theories are founded on fundamental understandings of human nature, forming the primary distinction between liberalism and realism. These two theories start from their views on human nature to offer contrasting explanations of state relations, the international system, and the dynamics of international politics. Liberalism, the positive aspect of human nature. Liberalism views human nature positively, believing that humans are inherently good and capable of cooperation. This perspective is closely linked to the Enlightenment philosophy of the 18th century, which is based on the belief that human society can progress through reason and moral values. Liberals argue that humans can use reason to solve problems, mediate conflicts, and achieve peace and prosperity through mutual understanding and cooperation. Liberals believe that these positive aspects of human nature can also be manifested in international relations. They argue that the international system is not solely driven by power politics, but can be ordered by laws, institutions, norms, and rules. International organizations and legal frameworks play a crucial role in building mutual trust among states and achieving common interests through cooperation. In this context, organizations such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization WTO, and the International Monetary Fund IMF are considered essential for promoting cooperation and resolving disputes among states. Another significant element of liberal theory is the emphasis on democracy and economic interdependence. Democratic states are accustomed to resolving issues through rational discussion and consensus domestically, and liberals believe this approach can also be applied to international relations. The democratic peace theory posits that democracies do not go to war with one another, based on the belief that democratic states trust each other and can resolve conflicts peacefully. Economic interdependence also plays a crucial role. The more states are economically interdependent, the higher the costs of war, making peaceful solutions more desirable. Realism, the selfish aspect of human nature. In contrast, realism views human nature as fundamentally selfish, prioritizing power and survival above all else. Realists believe that humans are inherently self-interested beings who act to protect themselves and their interests. This perspective sees the pursuit of power and competition for survival as natural states of human existence. Realism applies this understanding of human nature to state behavior. States, like individuals, prioritize their interests and survival, acting as power-seeking entities. The international system is seen as anarchy, where the absence of a central authority compels states to pursue self-help strategies for survival. In this process, conflict and competition are regarded as inevitable natural states. Realists are skeptical of international organizations and laws. They believe these institutions and laws are dictated by the power politics and interests of states. States adhere to international organizations and laws only when it aligns with their interests. Otherwise, they may disregard or evade them. Therefore, realists argue that international organizations and laws cannot guarantee genuine peace and cooperation. Realist theory also emphasizes the balance of power in international relations. States strive to maintain a balance of power to ensure their survival, which manifests in forming alliances, expanding military capabilities, and engaging in strategic competition. Realists assert that states always remain vigilant in their relations with other states, seeking opportunities to increase their power. Conclusion: liberalism and realism explain international politics based on contrasting understandings of human nature. Liberalism believes that international cooperation and peace are possible through human reason and moral values, emphasizing democracy, economic interdependence, and the role of international organizations. Conversely, realism is based on the selfish aspect of human nature, viewing states as competing for power and survival within an anarchic international system. These differences significantly impact how the two theories analyze international relations and propose policies, offering essential perspectives for understanding the dynamics of international politics. Deep nature of states. Liberalism. Liberals believe that states are fundamentally interdependent and that this interdependence fosters cooperation, leading to mutual benefits. They argue that states are rational actors capable of understanding that cooperation can yield better outcomes than competition. By working together, states can address common challenges and share resources in ways that enhance global stability and prosperity. Liberals also contend that international organizations, laws, and norms are essential mechanisms for resolving disputes and maintaining peace. These institutions create frameworks within which states can operate predictably, reducing the likelihood of conflict. Through these channels, states can build trust, share information, and develop norms that facilitate cooperation and mutual respect. Examples include the European Union (EU), which promotes political and economic integration among European states, and the United Nations (UN), which provides a platform for dialogue and conflict resolution, realism. Realists, on the other hand, view states as self-interested entities that prioritize their survival and national interests above all else in an anarchic international system where there is no overarching authority to enforce rules or norms. States must rely on their power to ensure their security. Realists argue that this anarchy compels states to pursue power relentlessly, leading to a perpetual state of competition and conflict. According to realists, the inherent nature of the international system means that conflict and war are unavoidable. States operate under the constant threat of aggression from other states, which drives them to maximize their power through military and economic means. This pursuit of power is not just a strategic choice, but a necessity for survival in a hostile environment. Historical examples often cited by realists include the power struggles in Europe leading up to both world wars and the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Role of international organizations and laws. Liberalism. Liberals argue that international organizations and international law play crucial roles in promoting cooperation, mediating conflicts, and maintaining peace among states. They believe that institutions such as the United Nations UN, the World Trade Organization, WTO, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, help create a more orderly and predictable international environment. These institutions provide platforms for negotiation, dispute resolution, and the establishment of international norms and standards. For example, the WTO facilitates international trade by providing a framework for trade agreements and a mechanism for resolving trade disputes. The IMF offers financial support and economic advice to countries in need, promoting economic stability and growth. By participating in these organizations, states can reap the benefits of cooperation and collective action, addressing global issues such as climate change, terrorism, and pandemics more effectively. Realism. Realists, however, contend that international organizations and laws are mere instruments of power politics, reflecting the interests of the most powerful states. They argue that these institutions are often manipulated by powerful states to serve their own interests rather than genuinely promoting global cooperation or justice. Realists view international organizations as arenas where states compete for influence and control, rather than as neutral bodies working for the common good. According to realists, states comply with international institutions and laws only when it aligns with their national interests. When these institutions' rules conflict with their interests, states will either ignore them or find ways to circumvent them. For example, powerful countries may use their influence in the UN Security Council to veto resolutions that go against their interests or use their economic power in the WTO to shape trade rules in their favor. The Iraq War in 2003, where the United States and its allies acted without UN approval, is often cited as an example of this realist perspective. Economic interdependence, liberalism. Liberals believe that economic interdependence raises the costs of war, thereby reducing conflict and promoting peace. They argue that through trade and economic cooperation, states become interdependent, making war less likely. The rationale is that states heavily engaged in trade and investment with each other have a vested interest in maintaining peaceful relations to protect their economic benefits. Economic interdependence creates complex webs of mutual dependence, where the economic well-being of one state is tied to the stability and prosperity of others. This interconnectedness fosters a climate of cooperation, as states seek to avoid disruptions that could harm their economies. The European Union (EU) is often cited as a successful example of economic interdependence, reducing the likelihood of conflict.
All right, so let's focus in on realism and liberalism. Again, these are the two major paradigms of international relations. And as I mentioned before, realism can trace its roots back to Thucydides with a reading of the Malayan Dialogue if you're interested in going to the library and checking out the history of the Peloponnesian War. But beyond that, let me say a few things about realism and liberalism. Again, we're going to focus on that international system level of analysis. So what is really important are the external factors. What happens outside of the state, for example. Imagine states on a blackboard represented by square blocks, okay? And so bigger blocks that I would draw on the board means that state has more power versus smaller blocks on the board. And all around those blocks on the board, there are other actors in the international system, such as IGOs, intergovernmental organizations, the UN, for example. There's NGOs, non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International. There are terrorist groups, there are multinational corporations, there are individuals. These are the actors that we're talking about in the international system. And so what we're focusing on in IR is those external factors, those things that are beyond the state, beyond the black box. And in the system, we can think of two major phenomena occurring. There's conflict on one hand and cooperation on the other. And these two things are indicative of the dominant theme of realism and the dominant theme of liberalism. Let's look at the cartoon. And so in the first square, we have former President Bush talking about building a missile defense shield, and that might ruffle a few foreign feathers. And you see one missile from Russia pointing at us, but he doesn't care. And so you see some more missiles, and he says, we can't forget our main objective, and that is to feel safer. And as we're providing more safety for ourselves, at least that's what we believe, Russia is building more and more missiles. All right, this is referred to as the security dilemma. And this is occurring because the international system is characterized by anarchy. So anarchy and the security dilemma are two key concepts to get a hold of. By anarchy, what we mean is the absence of any world government. That doesn't mean that the international system doesn't recognize the UN as a supranational organization, but it doesn't constitute world government. That differs what that differs from what we understand domestically, where we are under the rules and obligations of the laws governing our states and what we as citizens are supposed to do and not do. That doesn't exist at the international system level. Instead, you have anarchy. That is, it's a self-help system. Ultimately, states have to rely upon themselves for security. And so, in order to feel secure, they arm themselves. And as they arm themselves, this activity is going to lead other states, particularly their traditional rival, to feel unsafe. So they're going to start building weapons as well. This is the traditional arms race. Okay. And so for realists, they look at the international system and says, because of anarchy, because of the security dilemma, conflict is inevitable, and I have to arm myself in order to protect my state, the national interest of my state. Liberals, on the other hand, and please don't confuse this liberal with liberal politics in the United States. This is the liberal international relations philosophy. Liberals, on the other hand, argue that this security dilemma can be overcome through cooperative activity, and international organizations and international institutions help facilitate this particular cooperation. Here we see a very simplistic flow chart about how realists and liberals differ in how they view the world. So from the realist perspective, what really matters is relative power. That is, what is your power vis-a-vis your traditional rival? What really matters to you is what is your relative power? Are you more or less powerful than your traditional rival? And this concept, this focus on power is going to influence how states act. So those states that have relatively more power have very few constraints relative to those states that have less power. And all that's going to influence the overall stability of the system. Liberals, on the other hand, focus on shared institutions, shared power, and are more likely to say that these types of institutions and the idea that power can be shared is going to help states overcome the barriers to cooperation, such as the security dilemma. So liberalism is the most well-developed rival paradigm or challenger to realism. So unlike realists who assert that the competitive, power-oriented, and violent character of world politics is an unchangeable fact of life in the anarchic system, liberals believe that this global cooperation is possible and we can move beyond power politics, which is really the center and focus of realism. So realism believes that these ideas are fixed, that there's not going to be a lot of change in how states behave because of the security dilemma, anarchy, and the focus on power and relative power. Kind of think of the Hobbesian view of an international system. Liberals, on the other hand, are focusing on the idea that peace and cooperation among states produce absolute gains rather than relative gains. And so what was really important to states is, are you better off now than you were before? Okay, so as long as your state is better off as a result of cooperating with others, the gains of other countries should not really matter. Okay, so this is a huge difference between realists and liberals. So if you want someone to think about in terms of who might think of as a liberal philosopher, think of Immanuel Kant, who wrote Perpetual Peace, where he talked about how the international system can become more peaceful, and that is to have liberal states in an organization like the League of Nations or the UN, where you have a Pacific Federation of states, and that's going to lead to cooperation. And liberals argue that states learn how to be cooperative over time, and therefore conflict is not inevitable. Okay, so the next lecture is going to focus a little bit more on the particulars of realism and liberalism and dive into some of the alternative theories of IR.
My name is Elizabeth. I work for UNHCR, the UN